I think I might start just with some poetry, and I guess the one of the things that one of the things that has happened is like I don't while I have like as you can see a number of books behind me, they're not the poetry books that I have to hand are actually a lot of them I normally have to hand elsewhere and unobtainable. So I'm just going to see how I go with. Yeah, totally go to the shop for ice cream. Ice cream with Jimmy. Stick to the union. Pam, totally. This first poem I want to read is from a book called Villain, which is basically first half are sort of various poems, and the second half of that book are translations from the medieval French criminal poet from Francois Villon. But the poem I want to begin, I'll read several from this book. The first one is the first one I'm going to read is the first poem in that book, and it's a sonnet called Whirl. It is not just the words you use, nor what you believe our talk implies, but that the air your mouth shapes with a kiss to sense inspires such warmth in that disguise that every sentence, like a tiny whirl of wind, tornado-like, blows in my ear. Such grains of sand as oysters turn to pearl. Pearls indeed are things that one might hear. And with those pearls I would construct in mind a necklace such as you have never seen. And with stray bright laurels gathered from the wind, I'll weave a coronet of living green, so that upon our brow and breast might twine the coupled emblems of your love and mine. I was, for some reason, very into writing sonnets at the time, but I guess it's my, really innate, innate conservatism. If anyone, hi Sally, and if anyone wants, we'll count the books afterwards. Another of the sonnets from the book Whirl was at the time in the early 2000s. For some reason, I had a kind of like a quite a good line in paid art criticism. So I was going to lots of like art shows, particularly in Melbourne, and then getting to write reviews, which was like kind of incredible. But I'd get a lot of what ended up being, and for perfectly good reason, art stalkers, which are people who are artists who desperately want you to write about them, like and like who wouldn't. But I did end up, as a result, writing a sonnet called Art Stalker as well. For months you follow me around, your eyes like spinning targets done by Jasper Johns, to beg my gazer's darts, and in this guise take every prick as if love's myrmidons prove poignant more the less they prove to be. Just like Rob Rauschenberg's stuffed pool deluxe, his no spring chicken and its lechery would cut no mustard with the barnyard chooks. But if you're now demanding something real, the only image that's appropriate to summarize exactly how I feel is Pierre Manzoni's cans of artist shit. If you want art, then life will be lost. If you want life, then taste will pay the cost. Along with these sonnets, sadly, a whole load of like little poems of various provenance and I guess quality. But one of them, which does one of the little poems there, which does seem sort of pertinent in the current conjuncture, is called Hygiene, and it goes like this: Hygiene was fine for us, not sick, and then I suck when I should lick. So that was Hygiene, and I also there are also a number of like kind of like just like I think crappy little embittered poems. One of which was called Trifecta, which goes like this. Now you're married, pregnant, and drive a sports car. You must be pretty pleased you don't read poetry. One of the things I guess you've already have heard is that I'm like I'm really keen on rhyme, and because I have I have a I read to, I have two children, and I have to read to them a lot. And what you'd know if you have anything to do with children's books at all is like they're completely like rhyme is sovereign in these in the realms of administered children's books. And you know, rhyme still seems to signify basically poetry for a world in which rhyme signifies not poetry for anyone interested in poetry, those who are poets. So, you know, these days, recondite design, is it poetry? Yes. Parataxis? Yes. Funny enjambment? Yes. Translingual homophony? Yes. Rhyme? No. No, don't rhyme if you want poetry. And it's not least, I think, because you know, you have to be completely demotic to like rhyme, and rhyme is a kind of this. It really has neither meaning nor being just this sort of clanging contingency of dong 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 running in the backgrounds, or in a slightly irritating and yeah, and definitely senseless way. But anyway, unfortunately, all I've got at the moment as a result of these experiences is rhyme. So you'll be, yeah, I guess I apologize in advance for more rhyming. This next poem is called the Story of Architecture, and it was actually commissioned by jeweler called Susan Conn, who I used to work for as I guess Boy Friday in the 1990s, and she's a really amazing and fantastic jeweler. And I cannot commend her work highly enough to you. But her husband is an architect, and she thought for his 60th birthday that he should get a poem. So she commissioned me to write a poem for his 60th birthday. So of course it had to be called The Story of Architecture. Out of the jungles through the deserts burn wind, rain, drought, ravenous menageries, the war of nature with itself, the turn of springtime's greenery to winter's trees, nomadic drifting through the shitty weather, the lice, the hunger, more ape-eating beasts. They must have been at far ends of their tether, nostalgic for the womb's unending feasts. Then, in another bout of pounding rain, perhaps a little hominid's dismay once made it think and scratch its furry brain. It would be nice to find a place to stay. And that was it. The time had come to dig and break and shift and beat the earth to clay. They planted rice and olive tree and fig and learnt the seasons like the night and day. Once they'd started, well, they couldn't stop. Our furry ancestors went wild for space. They found the bottom could be made the top, but nothing was more mutable than place. So there was lots to do. They lost their hair with all their worry about what was what. They had to chop down, hammer, build, repair, create a habitat from what was not. From simple dwelling, it became quite clear subsistence level living wouldn't do. For after all, the neighbours might well jeer without a basin or a flushing loo, sans ensuite sewers, follies, balconies, a summer in a Windsor palace mall, steel ditches, steel kitchens, dungeons, embassies, museums bursting out of slanting walls with yellow pillars, roads, a superstore close by, grey bridges, villas green and vined. But in this unexpected vast uproar, where was an architecture for the mind? The zigzag road from Stonehenge to Shanghai may lead through Melbourne and its Methodists. Domitian's palace on the Palatine, a stark and gridded Mesian edifice or starry pyramid might wake to find the mind is architect of memory, and architecture's memory of the mind that sets the places for posterity. When grapes are ripening on their springtime vines and mating birds seek out fresh prey to strafe, an architecture with your soul entwines, to keep not things, but each one's passing, safe. It was one of the very long poems that I published. It got published in two tranches, I guess. They're both called the Mundiad. The first was published in 2004 as the first part, and then a massively expanded version in 2013. And that basically is a mock epic, is a kind of, you know, I don't know. I guess in heroic couplets, and so it rhymes like sort of relentlessly and slightly horrifically all the way through. But of course, I've also tried to mess it up a little bit, so it's got prose snatches in it and all sorts of other, interspersed little verses. And the one that I want to read now is basically, I guess it actually doesn't. It's the only thing I'm probably reading you tonight that doesn't really rhyme. And one of the only things, and it came from an experience I had. I was in Geneva in 2001, just after New Year's, because I was visiting one of my friends who'd got a job there, and it was New Year's Day. I guess officially the first day of the new millennium, and it was like incredibly beautiful. I mean, it was Geneva. You're in the mountains. It's obviously the home of the UN, originally the League of Nations, but also of Nazi gold, human trafficking, gun running, drug smuggling, and so forth. As a place, beautiful watches though. Voltaire says if a Swiss banker jumps out the window, follow them immediately. There's money to be made. But the other thing about the experience was that it was an incredibly beautiful day. It was hot and warm and blue, and I was like, but we're in the middle of, this is winter. We're in Geneva. I mean, I'm high up in the mountain, and I had this like horrific sort of hungover vision of I guess environmental catastrophe. So let me see how this goes. I sit in a Genevan bar, the warmest winter for 10 years, drizzling interminably down. Slim figures in their fur-lined coats prick up their collars to their ears and whisper past in ordered fleets. The mountains touch the single star hung over this hungover day. The bright drinks on the polished wood take on the burden of the smiles, now pointed and tucked up inside. 500 years of managed peace would patch the wound of any breast and make a mint from turbulence to freshen the harshest breath. Here anything whatever can be simply dumped upon the street. The public order runs so deep the piled up waste just disappears, and all the town sleeps faithful that, between it and abstemious gods, the coin will pass from hand to hand. No scholar can refute lays that never touched on consciousness, but in the humming corridors of nations leagued against the dark and scattered evils of the age, those well-heeled tongues surmount the fears that words are merely ornament, with their charitable intentions drawn from all too human hopes. Anonymous in all but name, they note and code the grand events. The voices of the dead are not where only the future can speak, offering up in place of thought the searing unbreakable knot in the rousing election speech, as though to do the good would broach the real as if the real were worst, and in this siren call of tongues lash the captain to a vanished mast, lest action cause the ship to sink and rats to swarm the sodden deck. Old roads twist round department stores that blaze their glories in the dust, and in the warmth of downtown grates, drunks sing extemporized anthems with a Dionysian strain. Safe and cool behind the glass, I take another careful sip of my tropical concoction and watch the ducks upon the lake. Trembling in the water's grasp, they hide their heads beneath their wings. The world will end in endless prose, where the committees meet. The hunchback in the cellar sits, scratching his desultory hump, while in the grey skies far above, an angel torn from paradise sees only the catastrophe of history falling where it may. Each person has a proper voice to protest lies and stake a claim. The cellar has its rising damp. There are no longer any vows to seal the good in heaven's name, or order so inclusively disparities of earthly fate that even the rich would despair of attaining civitas Dei. There is no other world but this, yet this world elects the soul as refugee or citizen. The jet of water on the lake is absent from the year's bouquet. In accordance with the general will, I stare at the lingerie ads stretched tight across the whitewashed walls and dream of never going home to summer in my mother tongue, as though the quaint neutrality of cuckoo clocks and merchant banks could cork the grimy incisions that southern cultures feed upon. The reggae music in the bar remains indifferent to my wish. The pinpoints of departing cars scrawl fleeting signs upon the mist that settles with the early night, those signs that only drunks decode. I wrap my scarf about my throat and stumble out into the streets like figures on a watcher's face. Even at this end of the world, time will somehow know to pass, from one day to the next, disposed to brief infernos and to ash. Hey, Robert, it's really lovely to not see you all. I would prefer to maybe, hopefully, in real life, whatever that means, one time again, we could actually meet. I guess I've got just a few more small poems, and like really, I guess, becoming more and more pitiful and pathetic as the reading wears on. This next poem is just a completely a complete clanger, but I really like it. My friend Chris Veich, who set it to music, and it was like really fantastic as a piece of music, much less so as a poem, but tant pis. Although the X, it's called claustrophobia. Although the X, which marks the spot, winds through the circuits like a clot to choke the artificial heart, the fourfold sews true love apart, such that its invisible point the dancing angels all anoint and smear across each orifice the bounty of their holy kiss. In this incarceration I could hear the buzzing of a fly, which on the tympan of my ear beat out the rhythms of my fear, that through the punctures then spewed a labyrinth of solitude. As you'd hear, it's basically a confection made up of lines from a number of other poets like Blake and Dickinson, or at least calques of some of their great lines. Sorry, I'm just reading the comments there. They're like so great. Thank you. Recently, I've got. I'd like to show this book. I've just published this book, Limericks, Philosophical and Literary, because I think the limerick is as we know, the lowest and the most doggerel of all verse forms. And this book, Limericks, Philosophical and Literary, I just started writing sort of spontaneously a few years ago, and it's all limericks. Apart from, I've got a long essay about the limerick, the history of the limerick at the back, as well as a short sort of biographical dictionary of regarding the subjects of the entries, according to the style of sort of Flaubert's Bouvard Pécuchet, dictionary of received ideas. So it's a slim, elegant, and slightly odd volume, but it has basically all the contents are limericks about people, about writers, philosophers, scientists who I really admire, or I like, all dead. The first one is I want to read is about John Milton. There once was a Puritan named Milton, whose poems were something like Stilton, rich, waxy, and white, with both substance and bite, to be served in the pub and the Hilton. Then there's limericks about all sorts of personages. There's one about the incredible Val Plumwood, who a very important Australian analytic feminist philosopher and ecologist, who had the most incredible yes, I did say calques, Toby, and thank you for Clemericks. If only people were clamoring for them, I'm sure I would be happier. Val Plumwood, anyway, very famously, I'm sure you know this, but it's still like absolutely mind-blowing, was in Kakadu National Park, and was literally taken by a crocodile, which I think leapt out of literally leapt out of the swamp, grabbed Val, ripped her back into the swamp in its jaws, and went into a death roll, which of course nobody survives a death roll. So but Val Plumwood fought off the crocodile, literally escaped, but was like had almost one of her legs, I think, was nearly eaten off. And then she crawled 6 kilometers, bleeding to the ranger's house in order to, and then was hospitalized, survived, and then wrote one of the most incredible sort of essays, I think, in Australian philosophical history called Being Prey, about the Heraclitean flux of the nature of predators, where of course we humans think of ourselves as the center and the apex, just de facto of evolution, but to crocodiles we're just prey. And as another great writer says, the ocean will have us all. Anyway, this is a little sonnet about Val Plumwood. Not a sonnet. Why sonnet? It's a limerick. A philosopher, name of Val Plumwood, considered the must and the should. When a croc one fine day tried to make her his prey, she knew what it was to be food. And then just one final limerick. This thing that they call social media makes you needy and then ever needier. For the more that you do, the less that you're you, as your being becomes Wikipedia. And I'm going to finish with just a ridiculous sort of Gilbert and Sullivan-esque rhyming poem called Musica Ficta, which actually came after sitting through a 17-hour lecture by one of the most appalling philosophers I'd ever heard. It was like completely hallucinatory. And right at the end, I had some sort of, again, a kind of ecstatic epiphany of I guess, in this case, turgidity and horror, which is quite fun, actually. I know. Hi, Michelle. And no, Val Plumwood's a genuinely incredible naughty food, as Michael's saying. So Musica Ficta. The fatality of natality is the trace of all mortality, announces the professor with the necessary gravity. His hair is thick and silver and his glasses photosensitive to hide in his palaver that he's mainly interest negative. The dejection of his erection won't dismay his suave complexion, which irradiates his orders as like an iridium confection. While he elucubrates on cause with centripetal circumlocution, the air weeps its pus-dank sores of indiscriminate persecution. The passing of his keynote will imbue the taste of trauma, at once preposterous yet rote, just like the patter of a fraudster, while in the lecture's air and moat detunes the memory of disaster, in which a humble labourer's coat becomes the mantra of the master. From Malibu to Maroochydore, the weather's quite unseasonable. The sky dissolves to shore with the requisites of the reasonable, while the grey zone of the law extends its empire indefeasible into the cyst-like nooks and stores of the plants and beasts and peoples. I think that's it. I think I've exhausted my yes. I think I've exhausted my poetry quota for the evening. So thank you so much, Claire, for inviting me. Thank you for attending. And I think you can post questions now, and I will attempt to read and answer them if indeed you have any such thing. I feel I should make my own muzak at this point. Perhaps should I just hang up? It's like speaking into, I don't know, speaking into Facebook, like a giant Mark Zuckerberg's maw is just like an over eating my face off with his, ovipositor down my throat and so on, just as in kind of techno alien, or maybe it's more the Matrix or something. Yes, okay. So I have a question from yes. A question from Toby Fitch. Can you tell us a bit about calcs? I don't know why I used that word, but I like it because it's a it's not even a homophone. It's just something that locks on literally to, and I think of it from one language to a next. Something like what extrudes a pseudopod into from one language into another language, uh, um, which then reuptakes this pseudopodia in a pseudo squared fashion. That's my explanation for you. Pam has sorry, that was appalling. I'm going to read my note in on from the biographical dictionary, I suppose, the back of the Limericks book about Emily Dickinson, if I can even, yes, Emily Dickinson, American, 1830 to 1886, supreme visionary poet, what a Puritan, preferred white clothing and intense verse. I don't. Fiona asks, "What is Villon's connection to the villanelle?" I can never get a straight answer to the internet. He didn't invent it. It's a purely homonymic, I suppose. Yeah, homophonymically, like fortuitous, but I don't believe historically attestable. But the villanelle is a nice form, and Villon's, a great poet. Michael has forwarded me the jacket, of course, the Geraldine Mackenzie review of Barugia's, Siobhan Barugia's Celts. Great book. I must have read that review at some point. It would be, I think you must all click on it because it will give you a much better account than I just did. Justin, thanks, Pam. And Justin, can you, Wolf has asked, can you tell us a bit more about your fascination with rhyme? I guess, I just guess it's both infantile and conservative, and I can't help it. And I really wish I could do better. And it is sort of fascinating to me how, however, how historically rhyme, the enthusiasm for rhyming, as Richard Hell and the Voidoids said, love comes in spurts, but rhyme comes in spurts too, both in terms of its in intrastanzaic apparition and in its sort of the epochs of its historical fanaticism for it. So the ancient Greeks and Romans didn't have it. It's invented, or it returns as a deliberate tactic in a whole series of incredibly widely separated poetries. So there's not even there must not necessarily be an influence between, say, Chinese and Norse poetry or Celtic poetry or Arab poetry, where rhyme seems to spontaneously appear and become a feature, very like. And then in say, medieval Europe, in the Dark Ages, they like rhyme. In the early Renaissance, they don't like rhyme because, of course, they're early Renaissance, and they're like, the Greeks and Romans didn't have this crap. We're going to get rid of it. It's too sort of vulgar and common, for us. And so I guess I both just like it in this infantile / reactionary way, and I also am interested in it's very neither the fact it has neither meaning nor being, but some sort of apparition value, and thirdly the historically very variable enthusiasms and geographically variable enthusiasms for rhyme, but as something that just can't not keep coming back even when you don't like it or you think you've dispensed with it forever. Toby, Zen Keelan says not in Japan. Indeed, not everyone is. As I said, is not everyone's been that enthusiastic. John Milton, who I read the limerick about before, of course, in his great work, Paradise Lost, in one of the little prose prefaces that he was compelled to write for that by his printers after the first edition. He of course says, it's in non-rhyming blank verse because rhyme is barbarous, the invention of a barbarous age. Toby asks, what are your kids' favourite books of late? Well, I guess unfortunately The Lorax and The Cat in the Hat and Hop on Pop, which is apparently particularly funny because they hop on pop at one point. That, and also for The Bad Baby, which is a book illustrated by is it Ronald Briggs? Is that I always get this mixed up with the Great Train Robber. It's a great book, but the Bad Baby comes to has a sticky moment in that. Look, thank you all so much. I'm going to go. I'm really glad I'm glad you came. I'm glad you asked questions. I'm glad you listened. And as I said, look, I hope to see you all soon, IRL.